Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending upon where you're coming to us from. My name is Thomas Keenan, and welcome to Securing Your Hybrid Cloud Application Data, brought to you by Kasten by Veeam and Zadara. Going to get started in about a minute. I will be joined today by Steve Costigan, who is the field CTO for EMEA for Zadara, and Matt Slaughton, Principal Solution Architect, Kasten by Veeam. I'm going to give it, like I said, about 60 seconds here. Go grab that cup of coffee, get ready to settle in. We've got a phenomenal webinar for you today. And if you could, in the meantime, find the chat window and tell us where you personally are coming to us from, no matter where you might be. And then, like I said, we will get back, jump on the agenda and some housekeeping, and then off we'll go on today's webinar. So again, give us about 45 more seconds here. We'll all get cozy, and we'll start the webinar very soon. Thank you.
Good distribution. Looks like we got Montana, Illinois, California. I saw Germany, DC. ON, I wonder if that's Ontario.
That could very well be. Yeah, we got a lot of folks here from all over the place.
South
I guess someone from
Africa.
India. South Cerny, England, Steve. Someone's coming to us from South Cerny. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, that'll be close to the office.
Got Nigeria, nice.
Poland, Amsterdam, Trinidad. This is a great take-up.
Thanks, Pooja. Yeah, Pooja, clarify. Yep, Ontario. So got it.
All right, folks. We'll appreciate all the inputs. Keep those coming, and let's get started here. Steve, if I can get the next slide, please. Just real quickly, we're going to cover just some housekeeping before we get off on the material for the webinar. Before we get started, we do have two windows that you should avail yourselves of. One is the Q&A window. Keep your questions coming regarding the topics we're covering today. And then if you have particular comments or requests, if you could keep those in the chat window, just like you've been doing. We will be taking those questions live, and also there'll be time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A session. Number two, we do have two in-session polls that we will be pushing, and you'll be able to tell us your opinions about and your insights and observations about a couple very, very important topics for us today during the webinar. So be on the lookout for those, and you can answer those live. We are recording the session, so the slides and the replay will be emailed post the event. Give us about a week to 10 days to get those out to you, to process the recording and to get the slides out as well. So those will be available to you. And you can share those, obviously, with folks who may not have been able to make the session or are interested in participating in future sessions. And then we really would like as many folks as possible to stay until the end for your chance to win a $200 Amazon gift card. We will be announcing that right here. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Steve and to Matt, and off we go.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. So I suppose we want to pick up with the first poll question.
That's correct.
So what are your top three challenges with containers and Kubernetes? Really appreciate if you could give us your top three answers there, so that we can ideally provide some further information to you, but I think more importantly, future webinars, whether we're heading in the right direction to understand your key challenges. So we're going to give that a few minutes for you to, or a few seconds for you to answer that. So I suppose the key thing on everybody's mind, I suppose, is around security, but not trying to influence you in any way, but it's certainly a hot topic that we see in the industry today.
Definitely seen a lot of adoption too. Just obviously containers are shiny for good reason though. So yeah, starting to see more and more faster adoption of Kubernetes and container workloads, which is exciting, but also sometimes a little scary. So
yeah, so interesting, the results coming in there. So cloud native skills gap at 27%, internal resources at 39%, Security and ransomware protection, almost half of you at 48%. Managing applications across environments at 39%. So they're the major ones, which is great because hopefully, we're gonna cover those in some detail in what we've got ahead of you for the next half an hour or so. So with no further ado, I'm going to take you into the next area. And really to address some of those challenges that obviously have come up in that poll, what we're seeing from our perspective is, businesses obviously are implementing a cloud first strategy, a move to a cloud model, whether that's on premises as a on-premises private cloud or a hybrid cloud environment or public cloud, and with that modernization of IT and applications, this move towards containerization, and hopefully that's part of the reason why you're here. But then deploying that, migrating those across multiple clouds, container management and apps across different environments, and then obviously that business continuity and automation of the full stack as we sort of move forward. Moving that forward in terms of what we also see happening in the marketplace. So we did some research undertaken from 451 Research here around the state of migrations and storage and data migrations in particular. Some interesting key points here is that half the organizations are running migrations with in-house staff, half are using a service provider. So if you're a service provider, this is an area for you to gain some additional revenue and provide additional services. If you're an enterprise, maybe you can leverage more of those service providers to deliver those capabilities for you. The other interesting aspects here is almost a quarter migrating continuously between on-premises and public cloud. And some are doing that on a daily basis. So again, almost a quarter. So I want to touch into why Zadara, why we're here, why we're doing this presentation jointly with Kasten by Veeam. We have 400 global cloud deployments mainly with a number of service providers. We provide a complete compute block file and object offering with EC2 compatible APIs. We deliver this as an OpEx solution, 100%, whether that's on premises into a service provider or via co-location and cloud adoption. We were very early in providing a Kubernetes storage interface or a container storage interface to provide persistent storage from our storage layer into early adopters around Kubernetes. Providing a capability around stateful deployment tools such as Terraform. So again, that API capability and using those EC2 compatible APIs. We're multi-tenant by default from a storage level and from a compute level. So this enables us to do that isolation, which is really, really key when we're starting to look at what's happening in the marketplace around data sovereignty and people needing to ensure that their data is sovereign and remains within country, etc. And we're seeing more and more of that happening within the marketplace. So underpinning this, what is it we're providing? We're providing that compute layer with elasticity, including EC2 compatible APIs, EBS storage compatibility. We're also complementing that with Zadara's block file and object capabilities. And I'll touch into how we deliver this and why it's pretty unique in the marketplace and why it's unique in terms of what we're trying to do here around the Kubernetes stack. So if you're familiar with AWS, you'll be very easily and comfortable in terms of adopting a Zadara platform. Various range of CPU and memory options within those instance types. So again, it gives you full flexibility. So underpinning what we see as this new model of application management. We're starting to see different workloads coming. I suppose things like ChatGPT and AI and ML is on everybody's minds at the moment. A lot of that is being driven by edge cloud services. NVIDIA with video-based content recognition, Internet of Things, and that's feeding into big data analytics, whether that's Apache Spark, Presto. But then you've still got to back that up, and you've still got to maintain that, whether you're running containers or whether you're running VM instances. The relationship we have with Veeam and with Kasten by Veeam means that we've got you covered as an end-to-end from a 100% OpEx capability, especially with the service providers. But to do all of this, you've got to be able to do this with automation. So everything that we've built in terms of our infrastructure stack is delivered with an open API initiative. So that means utilizing tools like HashiCorp's Terraform or other tools like Pulumi, and leveraging the likes of Kubernetes to deliver that automation and orchestration. Alongside that capability, from a compute perspective, Zadara started life as a storage as a service, initially into hyperscalers, and moving more and more from 2014 outwards into offering the same capability to service providers. So we're able to offer any protocol, any data type into pretty much any location, whether that's on premises, into your public cloud, into a service provider, or as a hybrid between different locations. So this is what sets us apart in terms of our capabilities and our flexibilities. And to underpin that, we've got patented architecture. This means that we're able to dedicate resources. So if you want to run multiple Kubernetes instances and you want dedicated storage to each of those instances, we can create dedicated virtual private storage arrays, or VPSAs as we refer to them. Your production could be running on SSD. Your test and dev could be running on HDD with cache acceleration. And then alongside that, we can create an object storage with immutability. And it's this end-to-end capability combined with what we're doing with Kasten is a key to this whole ecosystem that we're building. Because we've dedicated the resources, the CPU, the networking, and because we make extensive use of SR-IOV, this is how we do the noisy neighbor avoidance. So if you're a service provider, what you're offering to a customer day one to day 1001 is exactly the same. What this means from an enterprise customer is you can separate your workloads, or you can ensure that your key applications are running exactly as you need them to be, so that you haven't got a backup infrastructure impeding your daily workload. So again, a different way of looking at infrastructure and delivering infrastructure as a service is slightly different from our perspective. So at this point, I'm going to push over, and Matt, would you like to take over at this point?
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Steve. You make it easy. You teed me up perfectly. So I appreciate it. And yeah, we're going to dive in a little bit to some stats around the state of the industry. Obviously, talk about our relationship with Zadara. As Steve had mentioned, Zadara was a very early adopter of CSI driver, CSI standard, which we'll talk about later. But really, our two organizations are focused on flexibility, right? So the ability to move, migrate across public, private, hybrid, and working together, we can help your organization, or as an MSP, we can help you certainly achieve that for yourself or your customers. So some baseline stats here, just to run through, just to kind of set the stage here. First, top left, we see based on recent survey data, 74% of organizations think that traditional and container-based applications can be backed up the same way as, whether that's a VM or physical infrastructure. And I'm here to tell you, I guess, unfortunately, if it were only that easy, obviously we would all do it. But unfortunately, that's not the case, right? So Kubernetes is fundamentally a different architecture than traditional VMs or traditional physical infrastructure. And so we need to approach it differently when we're looking at data protection and data mobility, which we'll dive into in terms of how Kasten can do that in conjunction with Zadara. We see 85% of companies have experienced at least one ransom attack in the past year, as Steve had mentioned earlier. This is something that we're seeing more and more from our customers, from just generally in the industry. Taking my Kasten hat off, actually, we used to work for an InfoSec company, and this was top of mind, right? We're seeing more and more ransomware. A lot of these are automated attacks. It's getting to be a little bit of a scary place out there. I missed the early days of the internet when it was just cat memes. But yeah, we are now seeing more and more of this, focus on enterprises. Recently, there was, I think, a ransomware attack, I think just announced this week, that was focused on the FSI industry. So just be aware that this is out there. Hopefully you and your organization have been safe and haven't seen too many, but we're definitely seeing it increase across the board. Moving along, because I can spend all day on this slide, but moving to bottom left, 93% of organizations think multi-cloud support for container backup is important. This makes sense, right? We don't want you to lock you into any specific vendor. Obviously, we'll talk about later, and Steve has touched upon that flexibility with Zadara. And lastly, 75% of organizations indicate a skill shortage in their Kubernetes backup and recovery team. So going back to the poll earlier, I think we saw from the attendees on this call, we saw 39%. So I'm happy to see that. Well, obviously this was spread across multiple choices here, but generally speaking, this is something we see a lot, right? I'll admit, 3 years ago, if you told me, Matt, spin up a Kubernetes environment, I'd scratch my head and I could do it, but it's definitely it's a whole new architecture, as mentioned before. So definitely something we see commonly, and we'll address kind of again how Kasten K10 and Zadara can help you and your organization scale up in that sense and make things easy. So we want to move to the next slide. Thank you, Steve. So when we talk about persistent data, this is obviously becoming more and more prevalent as well, right? Sometimes we get objections saying, hey, isn't Kubernetes ephemeral? I don't have any persistent data, or it's all just in my pipeline. I'll just redeploy via, GitOps, which, yes, that can be the case. It certainly was the case, in the early days of Kubernetes and container native workloads back in 2016. But the fact of the matter is we are seeing more and more stateful applications in Kubernetes, and for good reason, right? So for developers, it's much easier to spin up their database or spin up a database directly next to their application from a performance perspective, from a data mobility perspective. So you can see some of these workloads here. We'll talk about a little bit too in some of these advanced workloads where crash consistency and application aware snapshots and backup become very important. So obviously Kasten K10 can help you with that. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Steve, if you want to move to the next slide. So high level, from a Kubernetes production, demands more than just backup, right? So oftentimes both Veeam and Kasten kind of get lumped in this backup bucket. And while yes, obviously backups are very important, there's other tenets here that we need to consider. Obviously, first, data recovery. Your backups are only as good as your ability to recover, right? So if you're taking backups every day, but you've never tested them, or you can't recover from them in a reasonable amount of time, that's a problem, right? You look at mean time to recovery, or making sure you align to the SLAs of your business. Very important that we make this as easy and as quick as possible, again, for you and your organization or your customers. Data security, we see at the forefront, we saw that ransomware stat. Again, Stephen mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar as well. Very important here that we're not just, sending clear text data and just, throwing caution to the wind. So Kasten K10, we'll talk about how we have this built in directly into the product, where we can help you and your organization and your customers protect against ransomware attacks, or, even compromised credentials or issues around that. Lastly, data freedom, right? So this is where obviously Kasten and Zadara, we play well together in this, this data freedom, data mobility, be able to move applications, from one cloud to another, or from the public cloud onto an on-premise solution, hosted by Zadara. Really important here that, one of the benefits of containerized workloads is the fact that they're containerized, right? So we want to make sure we abstract from underlying infrastructure and as much as possible, as well as making sure that we make it as easy as possible to move these workloads, to and fro, or from public to private, or across hybrid. So really important there. So what is Kubernetes native backup? Obviously, this plays well with the Kasten K10 space. You can see us right there in the middle of this diagram. So kind of run through, and you'll see obviously how we integrate with Zadara, whether it's their storage, whether block file or object storage. High level, Kasten K10 is a Kubernetes native solution, right? So we actually deploy within Kubernetes. We're not a bolt-on, we're not hardware specific, we're software only. So that makes it really easy, right? So we can deploy across, different Kubernetes distributions. Again, it's all about that freedom of choice. We don't try to lock you into any specific vendor. And again, we work really well with Zadara, right? So Stephen mentioned, we'll talk about CSI drivers in a little bit, but really important there how we can integrate closely. We can obviously take our snapshots. We can, obviously keep those locally as a backup, but also send them remotely. It's not really a backup until we send it to a different site, right? Really important thing here as well is using our blueprints, right? So for those application or crash consistent snapshots, one differentiator for Kasten here is that we're actually able to speak in the language that the app uses, right? So if you have a Postgres database or Mongo database, we use the ability of blueprints to actually make sure that when we're taking our backups, we can quiesce data much in the same sense as if you were doing even a VM or a physical server, making sure that we can address those workloads. And last but not least, it's because the world's come full circle. We can now run VMs in Kubernetes for those unaware with KubeVirt. So obviously Kasten K10 can help protect those VM workloads. And, for traditional, I guess we'll call it traditional VM workloads, deployed in more traditional sense. Obviously our parent company Veeam can help in that sense as well. So long story short, if you need to back it up, Veeam or Kasten by Veeam can help you out. And obviously for data mobility is a key message of our parent company with Veeam VPR. So yeah, hopefully we can fit all those niches for you guys. Some nice animation. You can shoot through that, Steve. Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, Steve and I were talking about this a little bit. So you see CSI in terms of that Kubernetes layer. Again, my hat is off to Zadara for being an early adopter of this. So for those unaware, CSI is Container Storage Interface. It's a CNCF essentially certified implementation for speaking to storage, right? So that's the beauty for us at Kasten K10 and for customers leveraging it. It's super easy to deploy and speak in the language that Zadara or the VPSA needs, and really makes things easy, right? So from a Kubernetes native workload, Kubernetes native storage, we're able to quickly, easily help your organization integrate. And Steve, you want to speak about storage and infrastructure as a service there?
Yeah, I think the other key element here is the model that we have. So, that block and NFS storage can come from a VPSA, virtual private storage array, that's dedicated to this tenant. And then sat alongside that, we're implementing, those interfaces that Kasten K10 is taking advantage of. And then that's going to push that off to our object storage. That object storage contains an immutability with object lock, which Kasten K10 can, take advantage of. And that's a key part of that protection mechanism around ransomware, because, what we're seeing is most of the ransomware infiltrations right now, the first thing that they're looking for is, where is the backup? Let's delete the backup. So having that immutability means that we were able to guard against that capability. If you can't delete the actual backup data, then you've got a recovery mechanism, and that's the key point is around that recovery mechanism. So bringing this all together and sort of visualizing what's actually getting deployed and how we're doing this. And me and Matt have been talking around ISVs, the growth from ISV communities in terms of them changing the way that they're developing. Matt mentioned that containerization and the application developer only really being concerned about their application. They don't care about the infrastructure, and this is the appealing part of Kubernetes, is that everything's abstracted away, as Matt alluded to there. So you're developing to a container. Everything else that's running underneath that is being run either by the service provider or the team that's managing the Kubernetes infrastructure. That Kubernetes infrastructure is being built on top of an infrastructure as a service capability from Zadara. That means that we're able to run those worker nodes, and then also augment that with the direct subnet capability. Means that we can inject these VPSA arrays as dedicated storage. So you've got complete isolation from a storage perspective, and then build on top of that object storage for backup and immutability. And you're not contravening the 3-2-1 rule of having multiple different media, multiple different systems. And again, that object storage could be local or it could be remote. So again, some key capabilities in terms of actually delivering infrastructure to you. So building on from that, Matt, I suppose this is where the whole mobility piece is critical. Having a Zadara infrastructure in Site A and another one in Site B, and really Kasten K10 overlaying on top of that to utilize object storage in a third location, really brings in the mobility section, but also like disaster recovery and business continuity piece. Because you mentioned something there, Matt, in terms of enabling that recoverability. So if you can mobilize the application, then you can do that disaster recovery. And if you can do that into maybe a service provider's environment that's able to stand this up and work alongside you. So if you're an enterprise customer, this is a model where you can take the adoption of a service provider delivery model to enhance your capabilities. If you're a service provider, you can provide these additional services to customers. And if you're an ISV, then it's a simple deployment. And this then starts to open up different models, delivering software as a service on premises using a containerized model. So I want to drill into this whole migration process flow, because it's the same that we're going to deliver from an application that we're looking to migrate. So we will take a backup to object storage, we'll virtually transport that to the target site, we'll ingest that and deliver the new application. And we've got a video on our website, and it's part of the resources that we're going to show of taking this, which if we were to do it end to end would have consumed the whole 30 minutes of this. But doing it this way, we can push you at those resources as and when you feel that you need to. So now we've got another poll question. And here, are you considering using, consuming, delivering managed services to modernize your infrastructure and manage container application stacks? Is a service provider in your thoughts, a cloud provider? Are you looking to do everything on your own, or is it not a concern at all for any part of your stack? Matt, I suppose this is an interesting piece to bring in terms of the value of a service provider around migrations, recovery, and certainly that disaster recovery, because I suppose it's a completely separate stack. So from an insider threat perspective, as long as we've got that mutable copy, then the recovery mechanism is potentially a completely different stack. Is that something that you think is important from a Kasten perspective?
Absolutely, yeah, and I appreciate you. I did not dive in enough into the S3 mutability, so obviously, yes, that is a key from a ransomware protection perspective, and absolutely right. So that is one kind of beautiful thing about Kasten K10 is our ability to, well, because we're deployed natively to Kubernetes, we can interrogate namespaces and we can actually embrace native RBAC within Kubernetes. We can also use different authentication providers as well. So it makes it very simple, right? I guess I know when we integrate pretty well with his Red Hat OpenShift. But yeah, we can really limit in terms of, you talk about potentially inside actors using RBAC or using cluster role bindings natively within Kubernetes, as we can help protect against those scenarios. And obviously, again, leveraging the benefit, if you're a service provider, this can be your core competency, right? So, if you're an ISV, focus on your application, know that, you're protected by your MSP that's, underlying storage or compute is Zadara. And obviously we have that immutability with S3. And again, that RBAC all within Kasten K10.
Okay, cool. So the results are in. So considering managed service, or considering using one, it's 34%, so a third of the population. Already using 26%. So we're up at over almost 60%, well, at 60% in terms of using or considering using. And then the managed services, providing managed services to customers, 18% and 31% considering. So, it looks like we've got fairly even split here between service providers and enterprises. So, that's a nice feel from our perspective to see that, we're addressing both the service provider end of the market and the enterprise. Obviously, there's 16% that it's not valid, so I'm presuming that they're completely doing everything on their own, and that's perfectly valid as well, because if you want to do that into your own infrastructure and run your own Kubernetes, that's also perfectly valid. Okay, so I suppose the next part is why both of us? Why do we fit so nicely together as a joint collaborative organization capability from Zadara and Kasten by Veeam? Matt, do you want to take it away from here in terms of the buy versus build?
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Steve. And also, I will say the poll, happy to see that it's always worrisome if the biggest category is none of the above. So happy to see that was, I think, the minority. And obviously, thank everybody for participating in that, because, yeah, as Steve mentioned, that helps us out, make sure that we can focus the conversation on what interests our audience here. But yes, so buy versus build, right? So for the car guys out there, this is a common thing. I'm a car guy. I in the past used to like to build myself, but it's with whether it's cars or IT infrastructure or backup, there's a cost to that, right? So it's all about opportunity cost and focus, right? At a certain point, time is obviously one of the most valuable assets we have. So if you're spending all of your time trying to build these solutions on your own, that's time you're not spending focusing on the business, meeting SLAs, making sure data is actually protected, or in the case of a disaster scenario, ransomware attack, or even user error, being able to quickly recover. So again, I know this stat came up earlier. I think within the attendee list, I think we had 39% had cited skills as an issue for their cloud native skill set in their organization. And that is obviously, that's a big challenge we're seeing. Actually, I need to reconcile this. I think this is a different survey. So we saw 75% earlier and 55%. Obviously, lower is better, but nonetheless, so we're seeing lack of in-house skills. So why focus on trying to keep just keep the lights on, spinning up servers or disk, or developing scripts, or there are open source solutions out there for Kubernetes backup. They work relatively well, but at the same time, again, you're spending a lot of time trying to roll your own when you can obviously leverage a core competency, whether it's built into the software or whether it's the infrastructure, underlying infrastructure stack, right? So some downsides of rolling your own on the right here, obviously support, that's a big one, right? So particularly in the case of, a disaster event, you want to be able to have that support line if things are not working correctly. You don't want to be on the phone. And as we all know, these events never happen at 12 noon on a Wednesday. Usually it's Friday or Saturday night at 4 a.m. or something. So yeah, be able to have that enterprise support, that pick up the phone or raise a ticket and get a quick response. Very important there. User interface and self-service, particularly in the case of kind of open source or running scripts. Again, oftentimes they work well. But when it comes to things like RBAC or just even having a simple user interface, being able to quickly and easily restore, again, not having to fiddle or modify scripts when the pressure's on. Reporting and monitoring, very important there as well, right? So again, being a Kubernetes native app, we obviously can integrate with typical logging software, as well as things like Amazon GuardDuty or Red Hat ACS. We inherently, as part of the Kasten solution, deploy Prometheus and Grafana, so we're able to index and make sure we are capturing logs and provide that audit capability where required, which is often required, obviously, for regulatory compliance. Metadata transforms. So this gets really important from a mobility perspective, as Stephen mentioned before too, when you're moving across cloud. So let's say, you've got Zadara, or, you've got, in two different environments, right? You've got Site A and Site B. But for whatever reason, maybe you have different Kubernetes distribution, or, you know, in the case of Zadara, we'll have a common CSI driver. But network's a great example too. Ingress, you know, maybe you have a different ingress on one side or another, or they're configured differently. The nice thing about metadata transforms with Kasten K10 is you can actually apply those transforms for when you're recovering or moving workloads from cloud to cloud. So really important. Again, this goes back to buy versus build. You know, it's beautiful when you move an application and it just comes up and works. We can enable that with metadata transforms. So really important differentiator there. Moving down the list, consistency options. So I alluded to this earlier. For those more advanced workloads, like databases, looking at Mongo, MySQL, Postgres, you know, Cassandra, Kubernetes Cassandra, you know, making sure that we can accommodate those advanced workloads and provide that crash consistency. So again, going back to that earlier message, you know, your ability your backup is only as important as your ability to restore. So making sure that we can accommodate those advanced workloads, really important. And lastly, multi-cluster management, right? So again, we might have multiple Zadara clouds that we're running on top of. In the case of Kasten K10, we actually have built into the product multi-cluster support. So you can have K10 deployed in multiple Kubernetes instances and manage it via one single interface. Makes it much easier to manage your clouds. Makes it obviously much easier from an authentication and RBAC perspective. So really important there. And I know, Steve, you flashed on the bottom, again, back to the opportunity cost question, right? So sure, yeah, roll your own or go with open source, but at the same time, what's the opportunity cost of that? Are there other projects you can be focused on to enable whether it's your customers or if you're an enterprise, your core business?
Yeah, and I think it's something that, you know, we see and we come up against quite a lot in this industry. You know, people say, "Oh, I can do this cheaper in this way and that way. I can do it with, you know, just open source and roll with it." But you know, it's when you actually need that expertise, you know, that expertise of a service provider, the expertise of a Zadara, of a Veeam, you know, a Kasten by Veeam support person who can get you back up and running quickly, you know, and that's the true value here. It's not just the cost of, you know, the hardware. It's way beyond that, and that's where, you know, this whole thing, I think, is moving. And I think, you know, that brings on to, you know, where we are from this perspective. You know, what is it we're building together? You know, we have this block file and object capability, we have our compute, and that's really our IaaS layer. But then, you know, it's a case of where are you going to go for your Kubernetes layers? Some people want to just take open source, some want to take you know, a Rancher deployment, an OpenShift, an EKSD, and that's perfectly valid. But then above that, it's the cloud native applications. What is it you're running? Why are you running them? And I think that's really where the value of Kasten K10 in that day two management, you know, if you want to move, you know, a version of Kubernetes, or you want to move from one location to another, you know, that context awareness, you know, just brings that additional level of comfort to be able to do that simply and easily. And I think that leads into what I think is my favorite slide of yours, Matt, because this highlights, you know, the real world in terms of, you know, what we see from business requirements. So I'll hand back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Yes. Yeah. So definitely, you know, in terms of a solution, right? End-to-end solution is making sure we can accommodate to different personas, we'll say, within organizations. Again, if you're a managed service provider or an enterprise, you know, we bridge that. We bridge that gap among, you know, whether you're a traditional storage or backup administrator or you're focused on platform ops. Obviously, our solution can cater to both use cases, and you know, we like to say we're building a good ecosystem among these, you know, sometimes seen as silos or completely different organizations. You know, making sure that we can cater to that with our you know, data protection, disaster recovery, backup solution. So, you know, look at the left in terms of, you know, what we think, you know, storage and backup administrators are focused on, you know, things that we can support, obviously policy-driven backup frequency and scheduling, right? So this is kind of, you know, this is core value stuff here. Obviously, you know, our parent company Veeam is well known within the VBR, you know, with their VBR product. Kasten follows a similar approach, although unique to Kubernetes, is that we can make sure we focus on specific namespaces, specific applications in those namespaces, and define our frequency and schedule based on the business criticality of those apps. So really important there, making sure we align to organizational SLAs there. Obviously, wide storage support in the case of Zadara, right? Love that we have object storage as well as that native CSI driver. Again, as an early adopter, that's huge, in terms of following standards, but also just making things easier for backup administrators, right? You don't have to worry about trying to change your configurations for different storage providers, and with that immutability with the S3 storage and Z storage, that's huge from a ransomware protection perspective. No vendor lock-in, right? So I know Stephen mentioned on the previous slide, we can support multiple Kubernetes distributions as long as it's a CNCF, certified distribution, whether it's, plain vanilla Kubernetes or Rancher or OpenShift, obviously support all of those and moving workloads across those Kubernetes distributions. So there's no lock-in there. In place or remote restore. So really, again, important there from a ransomware perspective. Let's in the case of, let's take an example here again with that site A, site B, similar to that slide that Steve had showed earlier. Maybe your site A has been compromised, right? So maybe your local snapshots might have been compromised with ransomware. You want a known good. How do you get to that known good? Is use that site B, which has not been compromised, or you can even spin up a new site if you're MSP. Maybe it's just spinning up a separate tenant. But being able to restore to a known good from a remote snapshot, right? So whether that's on an S3 Z storage, S3 compatible object storage, or NFS we support as well. Having that in your back pocket is huge, in the face of ransomware. Stephen mentioned, and I was remiss not to mention the 3-2-1 rule here. So obviously that's something our parent company Veeam very much focuses on, but important for all of backup. 3-2-1, for those who are not familiar, it's having 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, and one of those offsite. So back to that earlier point is that offsite's really important. So again, if you've got multiple sites where you've got Zadara deployed, maybe you have a site C, or you can do a kind of cross pointing where you've got an object storage and shipping your data that way. Really important there. And lastly, for our storage and backup administrators that are using Veeam today, CAST and K10, we fully integrate within Veeam VBR. So we have a plugin where you can actually monitor and track snapshots, backups occurring within K10. We also support VBR as a repository. So you could have Veeam VBR deployed in your Zadara environment. Maybe you've got the hardened Linux repositories. CAST and K10 can obviously point to VBR as a backup repository for export. So again, a great option there to protect against ransomware. Shifting to the right here with our platform operations, or platform ops engineers, things that we think they care about, or we see that they care about, is obviously the native Kubernetes application, right? You don't have to use an appliance, or you're not tied to a specific vendor. Again, because we're Kubernetes native, we can be deployed anywhere, software only. We can interrogate those namespaces that we sit next to, and it affords us some additional features and capabilities that other kind of bolt-on solutions may not offer. Really easy to deploy. It's actually, it's just really a simple Helm command to deploy K10. If you are interested, we'll get to it in a little bit, but we actually offer a free trial offering, or it's a free trial. It's fully featured for 5 worker nodes. So super simple. If you have a Kubernetes environment today, you can deploy it in a namespace, have a play with it. Really easy there from a deployment perspective. CI/CD pipeline integration. So I know Steve on the previous slide, you mentioned Argo CD. Certainly we integrate with Argo CD for that pipeline integration, for policy as code as well. So again, really important there for our pipelines. Making sure that we are, as managed service providers or enterprise, you can get out of the way of your developers. You can fully automate the creation or enforcement of backup policies for new applications being deployed. Multi-cluster, multi-cloud management. So this goes back to, again, kind of being agnostic and that freedom of choice. We have multi-cluster support built into K10, so it makes it really easy to manage from a single interface. And obviously multi-cloud management, you can have that deployed across different instances, different underlying infrastructure. As long as it's Kubernetes, we can support it. As Stephen mentioned too, obviously a flexible model, right? So you can be in the cloud. Obviously, Zadara fully supports was it EKS or Amazon APIs. So if you're in Amazon today, if you're deployed there, but you want to, maybe move to an OpEx model that's, my guess is less expensive, Steve, than a lot of the public cloud providers, you have the ability to do that with Kasten, right? Move those workloads, move them on premises. Again, that way you can burst to the hybrid cloud. And I know obviously Zadara can integrate with public cloud providers as well, providing that storage. So a lot of options there, no vendor lock-in. And lastly,
and that's it.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Matt, just to interject there, just to outline there. Yeah, I mean, for the service providers, a lot of them don't charge for egress, but they're able to offer capabilities. The development may happen in a hyperscaler, but then for latency issues that may want to run on premises, and that's really where this whole migration piece that Kasten brings is further enhanced in terms of that model.
Absolutely. And yeah, something we see, and you bring up a good point there too, Steve, is, oftentimes a lot of skunkworks projects at enterprises or just organizations get built in the hyperscalers because it's easy, it's quick. But at the same time, once it actually comes time to move that into production, whether again it's a performance perspective or cost perspective or just compliance perspective, data sovereignty we mentioned, it's really important to have that capability to be able to move those workloads and help productionize them. Where before maybe it was just, like I said, a skunkworks project. Your pods are just you have a one of one in your pods, so make sure we be able to scale that out. And obviously Zadara's underlying infrastructure can help support that. Last but not least, customizable and automated policies. So this is a really powerful feature of Kasten K10 is, we can apply policies at the namespace level. You can do it at specific applications. And again, we can make sure we match the business's needs, right? So our platform ops engineering can meet with our backup administrator. We can align on business criticality of apps and make sure that we have policies in place that can support that, and that we can ensure and go to our business leaders and say, yes, we can meet these SLAs. Through our policy enforcement.
Cool. And Mike, I think we talk about the 3-2-1 there, but I think everything that's here, you talk about the VBR integration, talk about the recoverability. Maybe we can extend this out to the 3-2-1-1-0 piece as well, because the immutability gives you an offsite immutable copy, and then restoring into a new environment, you can utilize that as your test to ensure you can recover. So maybe this whole thing can be extended way beyond that 3-2-1 that I suppose a lot of other vendors will be sticking up and promoting.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. The power of immutability is huge, and again, we need to keep ahead of our ransomware attackers, and we do that through immutability, and in this case, Zadara's S3 compatible storage.
So I suppose that leads on very nicely to really, I suppose the final slide from a deliverables perspective. What is it we're jointly giving here? It's that on-demand scaling, the ability to do backup DR migration with Kasten K10, avoid those big bang deployments because you can put multiple Kubernetes environments side by side. That maybe enables that canary A/B testing. The ransomware mitigation because of the object lock capability, dedicated resources from our perspective, and VPSA placement. I think the key aspect of hopefully that we've jointly got across here is that no vendor lock-in, industry standard portability. Move things around where your business demands it, not where a vendor will tell you to put that. So I suppose from Matt, from this point onwards, there's some questions that we've got from a Q&A perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. You bet. So we've had a very active Q&A window. Let me just start with one for both of you. Question has gotten asked a couple of times. How can Kasten and Zadara help with data sovereignty requirements? And that's for both of you.
Matt, do you want? I'll take it from the Zadara perspective. I think because we're able to deploy into a customer's own environment, into their own data center, a private cloud capability, or into a colo facility. That means from the way that we've architected the environment, if that's completely dedicated, then the customer owns their own keys. So the encryption keys, the management of that is completely isolated off to that tenant. So from a data sovereignty perspective, that means that it's the customer's responsibility for that data and the management and encryption of that. And the location of that means that data can remain in country because they're deciding where that data is being transferred to. And I'm going to refer to Matt now from a Kasten perspective in terms of I suppose the next stage, which is how you can control where that data sits.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that would definitely be through our policy enforcement, right? So as you mentioned, if private clouds, obviously that's start there, right? So making sure that if you have a private cloud in your data center, obviously you know what soil that data is sitting on. But even for those, the object immutability through Kasten native policies, Kasten K10 policies, we can ensure that if we have different what's called location profiles. So if we have an S3 bucket in our other data center, or obviously we want it offsite, so not in our current data center, but we know that this data center is on the correct soil, or even a public cloud provider, or in the case here, if we've got Zadara as an MSP deployed as a public cloud S3 offering, we can ensure that through those policies in Kasten K10 that we are that we are aligning to data sovereignty requirements, and it's enforced via the Kasten K10 policies. And I'm going to take it a 2-for-1 because you mentioned encryption as well, Steve. And I think I'd seen a question about encryption in the Q&A, so not to get ahead of myself, Thomas, but one thing, obviously, Kasten K10 supports end-to-end encryption for any data that's being shipped to S3 or to that offsite location for the backups. You actually can't turn it off. It is inherently, you cannot disable encryption when we're doing our backups. And we also support the ability to use, as Stephen mentioned, customer managed keys. We support HashiCorp Vault, as well as AWS's customer managed keys as well. So a few options there. And obviously the ability to support, if the use case comes up, that is one thing I don't know if I mentioned as well, a beauty of Kasten K10, then I'll shut up and we'll go to the next question. But Kasten K10, we have a 2-week release cycle, right? So we're constantly innovating. We have customers that come with needs to us. We typically can turn that around pretty quickly, depending on that need. So obviously we embrace, that cloud native deployment model, and we embrace that in our product.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And by the way, with that encryption answer, you did hit a couple of the ones that we had in the window. So let me jump to one directly for Steve. Does Zadara offer tiered storage and compute, or is it one size fits all?
No, we're very much you have complete flexibility. So with the storage side of things, we have all flash storage where you can actually even decide whether you want to encrypt or not on a per volume basis, but also whether you want to compress that data, dedupe that data on a per volume basis. So it's not a one size fits all and everybody's in the same bucket. You can even take this granular down to the volume. And then if you're using those flash arrays, they can be tiered down to magnetic media or even off to object storage. And alongside that, you've got flexibility of all magnetic VPSAs for block and file. And then you've got the object storage capability to deliver a completely different interface. So I think we're one of the few providers who can do block, file, and object in a single storage cloud. I think where we're different is that we've delivered this as a cloud model for the last 12 years. And that means that from our perspective, the customer has full control of where they place their data.
Okay, perfect, Steve. Thank you so much. Moving on, one for Matt. Please elaborate more on observability using Kasten in Kasten K10 in a Kubernetes environment. Can you elaborate more on observability?
It's very, very good question. And we're seeing this a lot from our prospects and customers as well. One kind of beautiful thing about Kubernetes is that everything can be done obviously by kubectl commands or YAML, but obviously debugging or having that visibility into what is happening in a Kubernetes environment can be tricky. So yeah, certainly through our integrations with things like Red Hat Advanced Cluster Services and ACM as well. Ability to escalate in the case of some sort of policy violation. We fully support that. We're actually adding, not to get ahead of myself, and I try not to do forward-looking statements, but adding things like SIEMs, right? So that's security incident and event management. We're adding third-party integration with that. So definitely, we're focused on observability monitoring. With the product, we deploy Prometheus and Grafana natively. So obviously, you can deploy a front-facing UI for those as well. So definitely trying to make it easier for administrators to monitor and manage their Kubernetes environments and understand what's happening under the covers.
Yeah, Matt, and that's a theme that we've been getting the questions is this integration with third-party tools. And as you've pointed out, we do a lot of that. And we basically meet customers where they are and the tools they're using. So extremely important to be integrated with the major observability tools. Turning to Steve now, if I want to move K8's workloads from Amazon EKS to Zadara, how do I know my applications will still work?
Nice question. I suppose, when you look at the ability for us to utilize that VPC model, that AWS EC2 compatible API, if you use Terraform to create your environment inside AWS, then you can take that same EKSD distribution, point the API endpoint at the Zadara endpoint, and use that same Terraform capability to deploy a complete new cluster, and then use Kasten K10 as the migration platform to migrate those applications from your AWS environment onto the Zadara environment.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. One for Matt. Why can't I just back up and restore etcd for Kubernetes for my workloads? It seems so much simpler.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a common question we get for sure. So Thomas, for those that aren't acutely aware, haven't been hands-on a lot with Kubernetes. So etcd is essentially it's a key value kind of mapping that pretty much all Kubernetes deployments use. Think of it kind of like a database. And the closest allegory I come from a virtualization infrastructure background, is it'd be kind of like saying, hey, I'm snapping or backing up vCenter, therefore I'm backing up all of my workloads, which is not the case, right? As we know, if you snap etcd, there are ways to recover. I'm not going to say that there aren't, but it certainly is not fast. You look at mean time to recovery. Oftentimes, when you're snapping etcd, it's in a specific state when you snap it. So maybe when you're coming up, you may not have the same number of worker nodes, or things change, right? GUIDs change, and potentially PVs or PVCs change. So snapping etcd, while you can do it, is certainly not a graceful or easy way to back up and restore Kubernetes environments.
Perfect, Matt. Thank you so much. At this point, I did, and this is kind of going to steal the thunder of the next couple of slides, but we are rapidly approaching the end of the webinar, and we do have a couple more slides to get to. One question that had come up is, are there additional resources that I can use in order to get more educated on the subject? And absolutely, the next two slides talk exactly about those. Number one, as Matt mentioned, you can get started with Kasten K10 today. You can use up to 5 nodes, fully featured. This is not a dumbed down version. Just avail yourself of that QR code on the right-hand side in order to go ahead and download the software and start jumping in the pool and swimming around with Kasten K10. And that's available day one today. So go ahead and definitely take advantage to get some hands-on experience with Kasten K10 and all its features and functionality. And then separately, if I could get the next slide, Steve. Again, this is a great list that we have pulled together of additional very useful resources that we've got for you. I did mention that, we did talk about training being a big issue with a lot of the folks in the industry, understanding Kubernetes, getting to that next level. A lot of the questions that we've had today do reinforce the fact that I'm hungry for additional knowledge on Kubernetes. How do I get that? And the very good news is that it is available. Free Kubernetes training is available from Kasten under kubecampus.io. If you've not had a chance to register for it, go ahead and register and take some of the labs. We have a variety of labs that cover a variety of topics: networking fundamentals, all sorts of basics in Kubernetes, storage, security, doing Helm, doing observability that Matt talked about. And so those are all available at kubecampus.io. So again, if you haven't had a chance, go ahead. We're adding labs all the time. The next 2 to 3 of the resources listed here are the Zadara resources. We have a Kasten migration demo, a Terraform example, and the CSI repository, and it's available again at the URLs that you see. Always interesting and very explanatory is the Kasten K10 documentation, as well as Zadara documentation. Obviously, those are both available online. And then finally, the Zadara free trial is at that URL that I am showing, and goes ahead and provides the Zadara functionality that you're going to want to definitely check out. Obviously, we also do have free 2-day advanced Kasten K10 training for partners that's available. And if you are interested, just give us a shout and we'll be glad to go ahead and get you information on that. And so it looks like we're at the top of the hour, Steve. So if I can just get the last slide here, and I'll just make a couple of more notes. I do have a winner for the $200 gift card. That is Michael Sevendt, Sevenandt, Sevenant. Hopefully I did not slaughter that too badly. But Michael, we'll go ahead and we will get in touch with you. No need to reach out. We do have your information and we'll get you that gift card. And then finally, just a special note. Hopefully this was a great webinar for you and got you the information you needed. These are part of a series. We are having our next one on ransomware, speaking of security topics, on August the 30th. And Alexandra on our staff is going to drop the link to go register for that webinar right in the window right now. So again, grab that URL, register, and we'll bring you a great webinar on ransomware and security issues in the industry. Very timely topic, obviously. So at this point, folks, we are at the top of the hour. Steve and Matt, thank you very much for all your help here on the webinar. I think it was a great topic, lots of great discussion, and a rich source of resources that folks can use for further investigation. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and we will catch you on the next webinar or online. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.